I felt the same experiences that anyone else would experiencing depression. And then they look up the information, and then sure enough, it says depression.
Yeah.
However, I also view depression as a different thing now, where it's an indicator of the person you presently are wanting to move on, wanting to turn into that new person. It's when we're stuck in the suck and we're stuck in our sense of self and we're not fulfilled in that being that we embody, then we start to resent ourselves. We start to smack talk ourselves. We reject compliments from others because we don't see what they see.
Carl, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
I You've got an interesting story to tell. So as always, I don't like sharing with everybody what it is that you do. So if you could just give us a little bit of background about what it is you do and what led you to doing what you do.
Absolutely. So I coined the title of Clarity Consultant. And what I do is I help folks get unstuck, celebrate the wins, and be able to be inspired and action prone towards accomplishing goals, which has a happy side effect of them happening sooner. And the practice that I developed, I call it neuro-linguistic somatic experience. It's a combination of breath work and story work put together. And that is a practice, it's an outcomes focused practice rather than a problems focused practice in order to work as the mindset gym for someone's mental fitness. And I say mental fitness specifically rather than mental health because I have this belief or this feel where when we're focusing on the one, we reject or ignore the other. So if we're only focusing on mental health, we're ignoring mental unhealth. And it's the unhealth that's driving us. So we're looking for things that people say is healthy rather than reflecting on the unhealthy things that we do that contribute to our state.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like fitness rather than mental health or mental unhealth.
Yeah. So what led you to doing that? Because obviously it didn't come from a void.
Yeah, it. I like to say that my problems became my passion. And in 2016, I was not exactly, I didn't have a very high respect for myself. There was not much of an admiration. I didn't like the way I was behaving in contrast to who I believe I could be. So, after a series of just an accumulation of the experiences at that point, I made the decision that I wanted to make a shift. And I made a Facebook post, asked a whole bunch of people, and I tried out a couple different modalities in that time as well. I've had like counseling, therapy, acupuncture, meditation, yoga, yin yoga, uh, exercise. So I had all these modalities that I've been trying. And so with that, I had the openness to explore, to see what could happen. And reflecting on it now, I believe that we all want the same desired outcome where we have abundance, we have joy, we have excitement, we have inspiration, and or a way that we can say that inspiration, inspiritatos, and that is translated from Latin to in spirit with spirit. So when we're inspired, we're with our intuitive self, our broader self, the as I like to say, the role model version, the person we want to become. And so tried a bunch of different modalities. Something that worked really well. A buddy of mine invited me to what's an event called the World's Toughest Mudder, and 24-hour obstacle course race. You do as many rounds as you can in 24 hours. And I was hard no for 6 months before this point. It took him 6 months and I saw him often. He was like, "Hey man, you wanna do this? I did it last year. It's a lot of fun. You'll love it." And so when he saw that I made that post, he immediately messaged me and said, "Hey, you want to do this?" I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I do," because I wanted to change so much, and I really dug my heels into the ground to drive myself towards change. And so I said yes, went to that. And what that event gave me the opportunity to do was really release and let go of the pent up energy, the buildup, the stress, the anxiety, the whatevers, all those like intense emotions and feels finally had a way to be released. And it was in a state where I was forced to do it. So I think that that strengthened my resilience in that case. And when that energy just got loosened up, I was able to start thinking about my thinking. And I was able to really uh, have a conversation with myself. So rather than self talk, I had a self conversation and really dug into the meat and potatoes of what I was working on or what I wanted to work on. And then from there, breath work was always a component for the last 9 years. I have that as a regular practice. And then story work came in later when I was doing a podcast and I had a guest of mine on, and he introduced me to a fellow named Mark England and Kimberly Keston. And Mark England was the founder of the Unlifted Method, ENLIFTED. And that's where storywork came in. So that's where I got the practice. I learned the practice and the skills for the how to go into the words and the stories and how to use the breath in conjunction with all of those to have both a physical experience as well as an emotional body experience. So that's literally, I just didn't like who I was. I solved a bunch of problems. I like who I am now. Now my problems are my passions, and other people get to shorten that window. They don't have to do 9 years of what I did. They can actually decrease that time. So it's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Well, that's why there's teachers, you know. So you don't have to go through. You can. Everybody's got their way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
But now, just to go back, because I like to kind of form a timeline. You say you didn't like who you were. You had some, you said you experienced depression that was undiagnosed.
Of course.
How did you know? How did you know? Like, what are the signs of depression?
Uh, Lethargic, low libido, difficulty sleeping, no zest for life. So the physiological symptoms are similar for everyone. And undiagnosed just means I felt the same experiences that anyone else would experiencing depression. And then they look up the information, and then sure enough, it says depression.
Yeah.
However, I also view depression as a different thing now, where it's an indicator of the person you presently are wanting to move on, wanting to turn into that new person. It's when we're stuck in the suck and we're stuck in our sense of self and we're not fulfilled in that being that we embody, then we start to resent ourselves. We start to smack talk ourselves. We reject compliments from others because we don't see what they see. And if we have the opinion that we are lesser than, then we're going to reinforce it by finding information to reinforce it. And if we want to change something, if we want to unveil who we are to grow into that next part, then it's going through the internal changes of changing who the person is and how they're behaving on a regular basis. Then we start to pull ourselves away. Because if we're depressed, we're still living in the past. If we're anxious, we're living in the future. If we're living in the present and the now, then we're only embodying who we are in this moment. And that's as simple as that. It's I know who I am in this moment, and other people know who they are in the moment. And it's a skill that people can practice where they can turn life into an act of meditation. And yeah, that was I just changed the individual I was. And then I could say that there may be a day where I would have a moment where I'm chapped or something ruffled my feathers. However, it takes me moments to shrug it off and move on.
Yeah, I mean, we're still human, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
the gap between feeling good and feeling bad is shorter. The gap of feeling bad gets less and less, and the feeling good gets more and more. Tell me, a lot more people seem to be struggling with depression. Do you think it's because of the earth? What do you think it is? Let me ask you. I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I have a good feeling about this one. I have a couple things. I think that one component is we have a scarcity brain. So we still have our reptilian and mammalian brain that still wants to feed, that wants to sleep, it has shelter, all those things. And with that in our human nature, we we see the accumulation of more resources as the method of our survival. More resources, better chances of survival. And what we find ourselves in a present day, where I see the modern moment that we live in right now, I think that we have so much abundance. There's so much stuff. We have so many tools where you and I can be in completely different parts of the earth, and we're chatting. Like this is like pretty cool stuff. So we have a large amount of this abundance. So our desire for accumulating resources can turn into like a habitual process. So it could be accumulation of more stuff, or it could be the accumulation of more food, the accumulation of more alcohol, the accumulation of more anything. Working out could be the accumulation of more and more and more. And what I see is we have that scarcity brain in a abundant environment. So we have an evolutionary mismatch between how our bodies are programmed and how the environment is set up. So what happens in my mind is because those resources are already done, and I'm also thinking of like Amazon or Skip the Dishes, anything where we get things super simple, because we don't challenge ourselves, we do not gain that respect and that love for ourselves, and we don't develop that competence. And competence is an indicator, or is an indicator of how good you are at solving problems. And solving problems and gaining resources used to be the same. Now it's solving different problems, more conceptual problems. So it's not a physical survivability, it's a psychological and conceptual ability. And because of the abundance, there's more opportunity to do less things while still meeting our base requirements, which puts us at a place of comfort. Not too high, not too low, just right. We're in a sweet spot. Some folks have the intuitive pull to go beyond that. And so it goes into developing the mind to develop more better decision making, to be indistractable, to be able to flow and focus, not for a long time, but for a quality time. And when we're able to fight against what that would be is psychic entropy, where if we're not placing order in our life, we veer towards chaos. And so if we're being pushed around by chaos and we're at the whims of chaos, then we're creatures of whim rather than beings of will. And when we become a being of will, and then we fight and insert order and parent ourselves and be the authority figure in our lives rather than waiting for an authority figure to tell us what to do, because I also believe that most of us already know the answers to many of the problems that we have. And so then we put order into our life, and that creates movement, there's momentum, we feel like there's more growth, and we are accumulating resources in that process. And while they can be outside of us, they're also within us. We feel damn good about ourselves when we're doing things that are well intentioned, that are good for ourselves, good for others, and a bonus is if you can get paid for it.
I love the way you've put all of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
That was a great question. I was like, oh, I got so much on that one. Oh, thank you.
Well, the thing is, like you say, people are getting too much support and not enough challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with the youngsters now, I mean, they go to school and they get a badge for showing up or a certificate. I mean, they don't. When I was younger, there was only one person that won the race. Now everyone gets something.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that I think that well, we grow in challenge, we develop in challenge,
Yeah.
and I don't like participation ribbons. I'll be honest on that one. I'll be forward. I think that it discredits the work that first place did, and it also affirms to last place that their behavior or their no. I'm going to frame this a little bit differently. It was going to be really harsh sounding. I don't want to didn't want it to sound harsh. Okay, I got a frame for this one where Jordan Peterson talks about love being a dance between compassion and judgment. And if someone has that dance, it's not the judgment could be your last place, you didn't do well, or you finished last place. That would be the judgment, and then the compassion is and you can do better. So I think that something else that is heavy with what we experience is oof, with that it's not having enough love for someone to be honest with them. And if we're reinforcing that they're and if they truly don't want to do it, then that's totally fair. However, I think being able to compliment each other and being able to say good work can really benefit a lot of people. A friend of mine says, and I love this, is game recognizes game. When people are pursuing progress and they see themselves in a light where they are proud of themselves and they respect themselves, other people that are proud of themselves and respect themselves are going to recognize that. And so when we can see where someone could become better, I think it's I think we're doing a disservice by affirming complacency or confirming that where they're at is good for them. I don't think it is good for them. It may feel good. I don't think feel good and doing good are the same thing. You can feel good by doing things that are not exactly good overall.
Well, the thing is, if we are growing through challenge and we're happier through challenge, then they wouldn't be happy winning that prize coming last in themselves. That they would. It might look good on the outside, but it would be a hollow victory.
Totally. And then it when and then there would be then every victory would have that same expectation because when with the thing with kids is we don't really develop that consciousness until 7 or 8. We're subconscious and just absorbing. And so when we're feeding our like kids stories, they're taking it and they're adopting it as a part of their character. So if someone has potential, which I believe everybody has potential, and it may not be in a sporting event. However, if it's in their like particular like skill set, the thing that inspires them, why not challenge yourself to become the best version of yourself within that environment, that industry? And if we're saying that it's okay to not try and rewarding people for not trying, or even yeah, it doesn't flow well. I don't think there's long-term benefits to having people feel good in the moment in that particular regard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talk about victim mentality. What is victim mentality?
The victim mentality is an acquired personality trait in which a person tends to regard himself or herself as the victim of other people's actions, even in the absence of clear evidence. The victim mentality depends on a habitual thought process and attributions. So, a victim mentality is a practice. It's a person that we see the characteristics, attributes, symptoms, traits of a victim, and we may believe ourselves to be a victim in the moment. However, if there's no clear evidence of victimization, so the experience of when the wrongdoing was done, that's when someone's a victim. When we pull things from the past into the present and we haven't processed it actively, then we can pull that same frame into the moment and we can have themes that go across our life. And a funny example is if you've ever had friends, or if anyone listening has had friends where they date 10 different people, however, they're the same person. So we can have all these different circumstances and contexts in the environment. However, if we have the same theme, we're going to see it and it's going to reinforce it. And similar to the victor mentality, so the polarity, the opposite, because there's the victim and the victor, uh, what we're able to do is gain something from it. So if someone is embodying the victim mentality, they are gaining something that they want. And it could be sympathy. They could be rewarded for that particular behavior. And it feels good if they're being affirmed for how much of a victim they are, which awesome. Like, do you want to win first place for that award? Like, sure. Do you want a participation ribbon for that one? Like, silly. And so we can have the victor mentality as this alternate where we can pursue the person that we want to be, that we can feel good about. And that's a mentality and that's a characteristics and attributions that are dependent on habits.
So how does someone shift out of that?
The way that I think is the simplest is to go into the original story. And when I say story, I mean dreams, moments in time, experiences, conversations, uh, stories that hurt, haunt, taunt, annoy, celebrating wins, progress, gains, uh, creating a future frame for what we're going to accomplish. So, stories is anything that we can write down, either on paper or on the desktop, or if we're having conversation, it can be written down. So, with the themes aspect, and I'll go with the personal one on this one. A theme that I had that was consistent, which I don't experience it anymore. Like there's no resistance, no fear of this whatsoever. It is rejection. And I thought to myself, okay, there's a resistance to this. What is it? Okay, what are the fears? There's just fear, false evidence appearing real. There is self sabotage or procrastination. And I define that as active participation in preventing our progress. And then we have rejection. And there's a fourth one as well. I don't remember it off the top of my head. Nonetheless, I had rejection on this one. So I'm like, okay, when or how far back can I remember experiencing rejection? And it was when I was in elementary school. I'm like, okay, here's something. Because even when we go into one story, it can open up the doors and the possibilities for other stories. We get to think about our thinking. Because I find that with the victim mentality, our thinking is dependent on other people's thinking and expectations of us. Our character is built up of off of who other people expect us to be rather than who we expect to be. The victim mentality is taking responsibility, the ability to respond, the ability to solve problems. And if, or when we go into the story to be able to find where we're finding that theme, go into it, then we write it down, and then we explore it. Well, don't really explore it. We write it down as the first step. The second step, we read it out loud. And then the third step, we read it 30% slower. And the fourth step, we integrate reading and breathing. And so we maintain the 30% slower, and at every period, the occasional comma and sometimes and, we take a breath in and let it out. And so with this practice, we're hitting the conceptual, the ethereal, the universal, like the unknown expanse of our mind, while we're getting the physiological and the nervous system involved with the processing. So it's not like talk therapy where it's two talking heads back and forth exploring things, where there's an opportunity for people to trauma and drama bond. then that becomes a dangerous exploration. With this process, we're taking the story, we're separating the story, creating distance, and we're alleviating the intensity that it has on us. So we are no longer owned by our victim mentality because we have integrated and processed and confronted our shadow, our dragon, our rival, whatever that could be. And the story doesn't go away. However, we have new meaning to the story. We see ourselves not in the story. We see it outside of we're outside of the story. And so that empowers us. It creates strength and a fortitude within us to be able to let go and move on and press forward.
So it's actually becoming aware that you're having a story.
Yeah. Thinking about the thinking.
Yeah. And also, I think like people are behaving the way that they think other people think of them. It's not like it may or may not be true,
Definitely
which
agree.
is then projected out, which then is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because even if the other person said, "I didn't think that," they still wouldn't believe it.
Totally. Totally.
It's crazy.
And it's interesting because when we start to think about our thinking, then we realize, oh, I do this thing because my mom told me this story, because my dad told me this story, because my first boss told me this story, my first love told me this story. And all those stories are experiences within themselves. And if we're not filtering, we're just going to consume, consume, consume. And the way that I think of words and the stories that we consume is similar to food and our macronutrients. Before this, I was a personal trainer, so I have a fitness reference. And so the building blocks of our body are the macronutrients, the carbohydrates, fats, proteins. The quality of the carbs, fats, and proteins we ingest and the amount of is going to influence the results of our body. I see words as the ethereal macronutrients of the mind. When we feed our mind quality words, we have quality thoughts. When we feed our mind shit words, we're going to have shit thoughts. And so with thinking about our thinking, we're able to swim through our thoughts rather than be like tied to them and be able to let things float away and just recognize, okay, is this story that my parent told me helping me or harming me? Oh, it's harming me. Okay. We're gonna process that. We're gonna write that down. We're gonna alleviate ourselves of it, and we're going to change it to what we want and write that story down. What does that look like? How would you embody that in your day? And yeah, I think like until we break down our own stories and start writing our own personal lore and becoming the author of our story, we're just going to be a duplicate of someone else's story.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. And also, most people aren't taught how to question themselves. They think the thoughts that they have are the thoughts and the original thought and the end of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's actually getting to the why. What if it's happened in childhood before you can remember? Like I know a lot of people have had birth trauma, for example. How do they know where that comes from? How do they tell that story?
Well, they can have open creativity to it because it's not the story, it's the self, it's our meaning that we associate with the story. So with the first step, I get people to write on the side of more detail rather than less, proper punctuation, grammar, as if you're having a conversation with someone.
Okay.
If they have a story of a birth trauma and they have bits and pieces, write a whole story about it and create something from it and then go through the same step process. And our brain can't tell the difference between our thoughts and reality. If it feels like we're alleviating ourselves of that trauma, then our brain's going to say, yeah, we're not going to experience it anymore because we've trained our body to process it and our emotions to process through.
Okay, so for the viewers, just run through the steps again. So they would write down the story
Mm-hmm. And
and then they
title
would
it.
read it out. Okay, run us through the steps.
Sure. So for the first step, you want to title it and write it down, and you can have fun with the title. And it can feel serious, but and this is a fun And this is a fun thing to do. It is specifically done as a game, and it's just processing through it. So have that in mind as you go through it if the feelings are intense. And so step one is to title it and write it down conversationally, err on the side of more detail rather than less, and proper punctuation, grammar. There's no specific length of page. It could be one paragraph, it could be 2 pages, whatever you write until you're content. Most people know when they got the story out. They'll feel like, yeah, I think I'm good now. Step two and step one, most folks don't do that. So you're in a very exclusive group of individuals that are thinking about their thinking and processing and organizing by doing this step. Because we may journal, however, the journaling is oftentimes first person written down, and it's oftentimes with like there's nothing wrong with journaling. I think it's a cool practice. I think that the story aspect is it just hits differently. So after that, step two, you read it out loud in just normal rate of speech. And if you want to supercharge this, read it in front of someone else because you're sharing a part of your heart. You're sharing a part of your soul to someone. And they won't feel what you're feeling. So it could be pretty funny because I've done one in front of my lady and I was just like, holy smokes. Like I was tears are coming down and she's sitting across from me and she's like, are you good? And I'm like, yeah, I'm freaking awesome. And I was reading the story, so it was fun. Um, yeah, so that's a good way to supercharge it. And step three, read it 30% slower, 70% your normal rate of speech. And what this does is it helps unlock the breath. For the second read, we might hold our breath in our chest. And if we're breathing high and tight, we're good to fight. If we're breathing low and slow, we're good to flow. And so if we're holding our breath in our chest and we're trying to read so that we don't feel the feels, then we're not getting the body involved in it. We're not getting the feels involved with it. So it's just going to stay exactly where it is. And so when we slow down the breath and someone's reading slower at a regular pace, not too slow, not too quick, just 30%. Then we get a breath in. And this will happen just on the flow. Similar to when someone's crying and they're having really like a really hard cry. I've experienced this. I think most folks have. And as they're crying, they're crying, they're crying. They get a physiological sigh. It's like an in. It's like cry, cry, cry. Oh my god. And so step three forces the breath in. So we can't, or it's tough. We can try. It's tough to read slower and hold the breath in the chest. So it forces the breath in. And then it's like taking a sledgehammer to that story. We crack it. And then we go into step four, where we read and breathe. So at every period, the occasional comma, and sometimes insert a breath. So you still be reading at 30% the pace, and then you would get a breath at the end of the sentence. In, side out, then continue on in the story. In every sentence, you integrate the breath. And this helps take that emotion, that story that was hardened by time and our polishing of it and our maintenance of it, and we get to crack it a little bit. And we get that when we get that opportunity and we get the breath involved, then we get to flush it out and allow things to flow. And it feels pretty cool. And so those are the steps. And at each step, at step two, three, and four, actually, even at step one, you can do this at step one. Questions that you can ask yourself: what am I feeling right now after the read? What emotions are coming up? Describe the vibe, describe the feels. So there's those. Then there is, where do I feel this in my body? Do I feel it on my shoulders? Does it feel heavy? Do I feel it in my heart? Do I feel it in my gut? Do I feel it in my legs? Do I feel tingly in my fingers? Do I feel light in my aura, in my space? Then it goes on a scale of 1 to 10. Where's the intensity? 10 being the highest. And through each step, you can see how the feels will change, where it's located in the body will change, and the intensity will adjust accordingly to whatever the subjective person's personal opinion of what that average is.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
Um, would they need to keep going until it's gone, or would it just start falling apart and then processing over time?
Depends on the story and the person. Where there have been folks that have been able to completely remove the intensity of the story entirely in a moment. So the sessions are about 90 minutes. And in 90 minutes, they were able to, because I know that no matter what stories they have coming in, by the end of the session, they're going to feel much better about themselves.
Yeah,
So, uh, 90 minutes for sure. And then I've also seen where folks still had some intensity. However, they experienced more calmness. The way he described it was uh, in contrast, where he just felt like a tornado was just destroying, like it was that intense for him. He said that he felt like he was in the middle of the tornado and he was calm and he was at peace. And with that particular case, if he just goes through and reads and breathes it, it's going to, because of the more exposure to it, it's going to decrease the intensity more and more and more and more. So
yeah,
it could be a revisitation of a story, depending on the story. And it could also be a point of going to the original story as far back as we can. So we can hit something where we feel it, and it's a story that we think it's about. We believe it's about what we think. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And what will happen then? Oh, I lost my train of thought after that one. Yeah. Oh, okay, I remember. So it goes to the same themes, different stories. So if we go back to the original volume of that story, the
yeah,
very first time we felt rejection, abandonment, joy, hope, sadness, solitude, whatever it is, we can go into that one. And then when we hit the biggest one, the heaviest one, then the other ones just wash away. So I leave it up to the person. It's more like a pick your own journey style. And I
yeah,
offer it up because I call it, we'll put the gorilla on the table. That's why I call that one. Where we find the heaviest story, we're going to put it on the table, we're going to explore it, and we're going to see what happens.
yeah. Well, it would make sense that whatever's most pressing will come up first because that's what's on your mind right now.
Mm-hmm,
And often it's related to a lot of things.
mm-hmm.
Um, as you say, it's a pattern. You'll see it play out in all areas of your life. So tell me about language because you said words are important. So and words are spells.
They are. They are.
So what words should people be using that they shouldn't, and what could they be more mindful of?
Mm, very cool. Uh, I'll start with something that's fun. There's the word abracadabra. Have you heard it before?
Yep,
When I say abracadabra, what do you think of?
magic.
Perfect. Abracadabra is an old language, it's Aramaic, and translated to English, it says, with my words I create, with my words I influence. And so, going with the quality of our words part, it then comes down to filtering through ambiguous and uncertain words and stories or sentences, statements. And so, a word, or then it goes into the talk where it'd be soft talk and solid talk. So soft talk, for example, and it's funny that I'm saying this because you started with what people should and shouldn't do. I think they can do this. So soft talk has ambiguity. There's uncertainty. Words, examples of it would be, I should make it to the party for 5 p.m. I could make it to the party for 5 p.m. I might make it to the party for 5 p.m. I'm probably going to make it to the party for 5 p.m. I sort of want to make it to the party for 5 p.m. And if you can have a question after a statement, it's not solid enough. Are you going to the party? Yes or no? When we remove the soft talk, the ambiguity, then we have solid talk. And that's simply, I can make it to the party for 5 p.m. I'm not going to the party. I'm undecided. I'll let you know. So then both the person speaking and the receiver understand and have communication clarity. There's no ambiguity. And then we're being honest as well. And what happens when we remove as much soft talk as often as possible, because we will still say it. I'll still say might, could, can, should. Uh, However, when we catch ourselves, then we can translate it over to the solid talk in the moment. And when we take that moment, we translate it from something that's harmful to helpful, we develop competence in our decision making. When we can make the small decisions, when we're microdosing small decisions and we're sticking to it, what happens is we are developing that competence. And as a side effect of competence, we gain confidence. We experience confidence. And the better we are at figuring out or making decisions on the small scale with small decisions that are seemingly insignificant, like a party or a get together, or maybe they are, or and just whatever it is, what happens is we can make the big decisions and we trust ourselves and understand that we are capable of making those decisions because we have so much practice before that point. And it starts with the small decisions, removing the soft talk, having the solid talk, and being reflective of what we say as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical, especially people that feel victimized. Maybe they're in a toxic relationship and they feel like they don't trust anybody anymore, but they can't even trust themselves because they keep
Yeah.
saying, I'm going to leave, and they don't leave. Or
Mm-hmm.
the next time you say that I'm going to leave, and then the next time they say it, nothing happens. There's no
Mm-hmm.
follow through.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's, oh, I had a thought that popped up on that one. It's interesting because then the reflection comes in and it is, where is the common denominator in my problems?
Yeah.
It's like, my life sucks. Well, I wonder why. Because the thing that's interesting, Steve Jobs has a quote. He says, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, not forwards. So when we're looking back and we look at all the decisions we made up to this point, it makes sense. It's mathematical, makes sense because one decision plus one decision plus one decision plus one decision plus one decision, it makes sense looking back how we got to this point in time. And so when we have the opportunity to be reflective rather than, because if we think of ourselves as the victim, we're only going to think of me rather than I. And those are two different things. I
Yeah.
is, I am going to do something different. Oh, woe is me. And so there's accountability and responsibility that's with that. And until folks step into that, they it'll just be a time loop. They'll just be stuck in the same spot over and over and over again. And people can stay there if they want, if they're cool with it.
And the illusion is that it's others doing it to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. Totally. And the thing that's interesting is projections, to me, projections are reflections. The characteristics that we admire and resent in others, we oftentimes see within ourselves as well. And if we feel resentment towards another, there could be something that we're projecting to them that we feel resentment towards ourselves. And when we're pointing one finger at someone or at something, it could be teachers, parents, priests, politicians, whatever. It could be any of these things. And when we're pointing it, there's three fingers pointing back at us. Like three. And so I found that because I had this thought in my own development as well, where, and it goes into inner child work. And I came to the theory that until the point we consciously make the decision to do otherwise, we're going to show up for our inner child as our parents showed up for us. And I had someone ask, well, what if the kids were abandoned or rejected? And my response was, they're going to pretend as if the inner child doesn't exist. They will abandon that inner child. They
Wow.
will give up that curiosity and that openness. And
How
so
did they how did they reconnect with the inner child?
the way that stories, because there could be moments in time where we can reflect on a hard time and be proud of the kid that got us through it. Because something that we forget is, in order to get to where we are now, we had to go through that event or that experience. We had to go through the accumulation of these to be able to forge who we were or who we are. And so I think when we frame it where my present self is writing a thank you letter to my 9-year old self, and then I tell him how proud I am of him and how I'm going to make sure I do good by him, then that part of the inner child is reconnected. The way I envision it is we go from standing over top and pointing down to kneeling down to eye level to being able to embrace, give them a hug. And then the next step after that is you stand side by side together looking at the exact same goal.
Yeah.
So that's the way I would go about reconnecting and have
So that
fun with that.
nice. Well, that's like reparenting yourself because even if you had parents,
Hmm.
we still tend to have taken things. I mean, our parents are the world to us, so we think they know everything.
Hmm.
And if they were having a bad day, we think it's something we did, and that's, and it could be something minor they don't even remember, and we carry it through through us through life.
Totally. It's so
Crazy.
funny. It's also
So
interesting to
you,
think. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, you said people can use language to stay focused.
Mhm.
So how would they use that to stay focused? And in which case should they stay focused? Because you don't always want to
Should
be
or
focused.
can. No, yeah, focus is, well, for focus and flow, there is a system to it where there's the struggle, then there's the flow, or if there's the struggle, then there's the release, then there's the flow, then there's the recharge. When people have a goal that inspires them or it's a problem that they want to solve, and so they're inspired to get away from pain, uh, we start with a frame, of course, where we have the statement of what we want to accomplish. And then we go into the story. What does that look like? Either from a past, present, or future tense. Past tense, you already accomplished it and you're on the other side. Present tense, you're currently working towards it. And future tense, you're preparing yourself now for it. So then we write a story around that. What would that look like in a character? Who's the person that would be able to accomplish this target, this focus? Because the target and the focus, that's where we're going. Because a focus, something that we're focusing on, is simply something that we want to get done. And if if we can, it's similar to pay attention. We pay focus, and it's ultimately coming down to the decision to focus. So when we have something that inspires us to focus on, it becomes easier to flow with focus. And so when we have that story, people feel excited, they'll feel inspired, and then they become more action prone. So we want to create the internal and external environment so that we have an action proneness. We're able to get into that state of working and building or creating and finish it. And then plan. Then it comes up with a plan from the story. What came up? You already know the answers to how to do the thing. So what are the next steps, and what are you going to do in the next 24 hours? What are you going to do in the next 48 hours? What are you going to do in the next 2 weeks? What are you going to do in the next 3 months? And then however much duration we do.
Yeah, I like that. If people are able to actually see themselves having achieved it, then they can go back and go, well, what is it that I did to get here? And your mind will already have done the working out. It's just a case of reminding yourself of the fact that that's what you wanted to do. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And then when we find ourselves in a state where we're not inspired or we forget why we're doing what we're doing, then we can revisit the story read it through, breathe it through, see what
Yeah.
happens. And if you still feel like not doing it afterwards, go ahead.
It's interesting. I read a Scientology book that was written by L. Ron Hubbard, but it's quite an in-depth. Um, it's called The Science of Survival.
Mm.
But what he does, or what he used to do, was get people to repeat their story over and over and over until it had no more impact. And then they would start laughing. And then he knew, okay, it's broken. But I mean, I think that would be quite tedious for someone to be sitting there listening and going, okay, say it again. Say it again.
I agree, and that's why I'm happy with each step. There's a different way of
Yeah.
reading. And
Yeah.
then something that's really cool because I do the same practice one to one and one to many with the fourth step where there's the read and the breathe. I'll breathe if it's just one on one, like how, if we're on a Zoom just like this, I'll breathe with you. So you would read through it, I would breathe. So it develops that community aspect. And then when it's even on Zoom or especially in person, when it's a group and you have everyone breathing together and sharing their stories, it is crazy.
I
Supercharged.
am sure. Because now you've got a group mind working towards a common goal.
Totally.
That's awesome. So, how do people get hold of you?
They can find my website, clarityconsultant.ca, and on the socials, I am Dapper Dude Kyle, Dude. Oh, whoops. DAPPER, DUDEKYLE. And if honestly, if someone does the four-step process, DM me on Instagram. I want to hear about your experience and what it was like. And Instagram's also, if you want to direct message me, that's the quickest place.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, do you have a message for our viewers before we go?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. I'm going to share my personal mantra, and it is keep up the kindness. And when I say kindness, I don't think of it as a feeling. I don't think of it as an emotion. Kindness to me is something that is recognizable. I believe human beings can recognize kindness when they see it. And that shows that it is a practice. It is something that we embody. And by keeping up the kindness, we keep up that kindness with ourselves and we keep up kindness with others. And we discern that kindness. Who gets some kindness, who doesn't get some kindness, it's all good. But keep up some good kindness.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, I will post all your links below so people can get hold of you if they want to. Guys, please send a DM. We want to know that you've done your work.
It was very nice chatting with you.
Yeah, it was great. It was good fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.